From Royal Holloway, University of London, and this is Ling Zhang from College, University of London. And we are getting up an exciting new mailing list for everybody who's interested in issues of biculturalism and multiculturalism in business. So it's all very much at the new stage, the early stage, so it's forming, developing, and doing all sorts of interesting and exciting things. And if you want in on the ground floor, we will be circulating sheets. Please express your interest by putting your name and your email on this. We will add you to the list, and then who knows where it will happen. Facebook groups, blogs, LinkedIn networks, our very own IT empire. But, yeah.
With other
Yes.
other people. So if you have a new paper out or a book out or policy white paper out, just
place to get discussions,
list.
organize and advertise your seminars, hook up with people at major events like this.
Increase your citation rates.
Absolutely.
There are ways to do.
2 words, impact factor.
Okay.
Anyway, we look forward to hearing from you all, and I will give over to Terry.
Thank you.
Okay, so very briefly, this session is really key to making the day work in our opinion, certainly in my opinion. And I'm particularly grateful, therefore, to all of the people on the panel here that I'll introduce one by one in a moment, for coming in on a Saturday to a session which is not within their own core professional group, and giving their time to us. What's even more difficult is responding to the request that we made, which is that we'd like you to trigger thought and trigger discussion in the conference by identifying some problems, dilemmas, gaps in your field of work relating to the subject of today's PDW, and telling people what kind of research is needed. I'm not sure whether they can all give very precise answers to that, but nonetheless, we'll be hearing from a range of perspectives, from the legal to the corporate, to the government, to the HR, and looking at people who have an interest, an associated interest to our academic one, and want to help us to try to fine-tune our thoughts and fine-tune our research proposals. So I'd like to start with today's session with David Alger. I'm not going to say very much about the candidates, except to tell you that David's an immigration lawyer here in Victoria and Vancouver. And if you go into his website, David presents himself as somebody who's doing what he's doing because he has the kind of passion that we've already talked about being the child of immigrants to British Columbia. And so I'm going to ask David to give us his perspectives on the work that he does with people who are immigrating to this region and to this country, and to get us going. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Terry. As I was, as I was listening to the excellent lectures this morning that preceded this, the issue of macro and micro emerged, the macro-micro levels. And as practitioners, as immigration lawyers, we are actually at the intersection of those macro and micro levels. And we see it as regulations change from top down, as policies change, and we see the consequences of all of these policies on the clients that we represent. And what I'm going to do this morning is go through, very quickly, a historical overview of immigration over the last 40 years here in Canada. And as we all know, Canada has an all-encompassing, a magnanimous impression all around the world as being a country where everybody yearns to immigrate. This impression was created by a very stable, open immigration policy heralded in by Pierre Trudeau in the mid-60s or late 60s. Selection of immigrants was based on the human capital factor, on based on age, education, work experience, and language proficiency. It was an immigrant-centered type of immigration, where the qualities of the immigrant were central to the making of the selection of the applicant. It was based on a point system, idealizing people who were between the ages of 22 to 49, people who had a university education, had 4 years of work experience, and spoke moderate English or French. Had you qualified under the point system, you would then be assured of immigration. The process was non-discriminatory, was transparent, and was all-encompassing and universal. The yearly quota for immigration was set at 250,000 people a year. The result was outstanding. Everybody wanted to come to Canada. In fact, Toronto, which nearly half of all immigrants to Canada chose as being the destination, under some studies became and is the most demographically diverse city in the world, which reflects the population of the world. In addition, the humanitarian and compassionate application that the Immigration Act then had for refugees increased the image of tolerance and acceptance here in Canada. But sometimes a program itself can become a victim of its own success, and immigration was no exception. By the early 2000s, independent skilled worker applications to Canada had reached over 1 million. Processing times increased. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, with applications being processed right around the world at the various Canadian consulates, and, get this, all being done by paper. Well, much can change it was taking about 5, sometimes 8 years to process independent applications. And much can change in 2, 5, 8, or 10 years. Jobs change, marital statuses change, country conditions change. And Canada was falling further and further behind as far as processing independent applications. It was falling behind Britain, Australia, New Zealand. By the mid-2000s, the perfect storm emerged. Heightened security by 9/11, the economic conditions of the world around 2008, and the change on the Canadian political spectrum from liberal to conservative. Since 2008, we have now a government which has a political philosophy and which has been very proactive in legislating and implementing a change in immigration policy in line and in its belief and mantra of economics, enforcement, and efficiency. Change has taken place both in form and in substance. The present government, to its credit, has brought us into the 21st century as far as processing is concerned, in the hope of speed and efficiency. 7 years ago, the Immigration Department would not communicate with anyone by email, citing privacy. Today, there is very little that is not done electronically. The original point system, based on the human capital factors of age, education, work experience, and language, has now been enhanced with a government-centric aspect, namely that all successful permanent immigration must be aligned with some arranged employment by a Canadian employer who is ready, willing, and able to sponsor the potential applicant. Other major shifts include altering the ideal demographic age, that old range was 22 to 49, to the new range of 20 to 29. Enhancing, secondly, immigration for those who have Canadian education and Canadian experience, and favoring those who have excellent English and French language skills. So how does the government attract such candidates? To ensure that such a policy provides the numbers needed for immigration, the government has increased the number of students being accepted at the university level. The number of students has doubled over the last 10 years, from 150,000 to over 300,000 per year who have valid student permits. As well, the government has increased the number of youth who can come to Canada under the international experience class. This is agreements that the Canadian government has reached with 35 to 40 countries where youth between the ages of 18 and 30 can come unimpeded, without qualification, to work in Canada anywhere from 1 to 4 years. So at any given time here in Canada, there is a resource of potentially 350,000 young people who have the potential for applying for permanent residence. As a future demographic plan, this is brilliant. From the government's point of view, because it recognizes the reality by 2030, the only increase in population Canada will have will come from immigration, since deaths will outpace births. And by having a younger demographic, we're attracting a group that will have at least the skill sets, the knowledge, and who can contribute to the tax base for years to come. By focusing on the students from within Canada, and that's another objective of this government, to bring immigration within Canada rather than having it spread throughout the world, let's have the students and the workers in Canada, and let's attract and perfect permanent residence of these individuals. By focusing on students from within Canada, we're ensuring the easy transition of these immigrants who've had the benefit of Canadian experience, work experience, Canadian education, and having built up a network from within Canada, which will then adapt to the changing labor scene. But there is a problem. And I know Terry wanted me to address at least one problem. And it appears at the end of this brilliant plan. Having successfully completed their 2 years or 4 years of programs, having obtained their 3-year work permits to which they're entitled after their diploma, and having landed their ideal job with a Canadian employer, these very committed youth must now ask the employer to advertise their position for Canadians, so that the employer has to make an application to the Employment Social Development Canada to see whether there are Canadians, must eliminate the Canadians who apply, must assure that only this foreign national is the one that's eligible. It is a bureaucratic, intense, rigorous aspect which must be fulfilled before that student can be invited to apply for permanent residence under the express entry system, which was introduced in January. Without such approval, this particular student, or now foreign worker, will not get permanent residence despite having been here 4, 5, 6, 7 years. That is the greatest source of frustration that exists now for these very capable people that Canada has managed to attract. Before this coupling of this employer sponsorship to human capital factors, the Canadian experience class was an avenue of immigration for all of these individuals. All they had to do was work 1 year, then they could apply for permanent residence. It was a phenomenally easy way to use that great resource and that great pool of young people and get them permanent resident status, whether they came under the international experience class or whether they studied here as students. But this recently added sponsorship aspect has made it extremely difficult, extremely frustrating for them, and the employers in Canada are somewhat baffled as well. When I have an employee, I want this employee, why do I have to now advertise nationally? However, that is the current policy that is in place, and I from a practitioner's point of view, I hope it changes. I think it will gradually, perhaps over time, as the government works through older files, but at this point, that is one of the major problems. And we, as a country, have a fantastic reputation for welcoming people and attracting people. I don't think we should lose it at this point with this kind of policy. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I propose we listen to all 5 members of the panel, and then we'll have ample time for questions at the end. Our second invited speaker is Jonah Langevin. Joan works for the Vancouver Economic Foundation, and sometimes, you know, culturally, the people you have most difficulty attracting are your closest neighbors. So for a business conference to attract an economist is a really great coup. And I thank Joan for coming and talking about your organization's perspective on this issue.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It's so refreshing. I so much enjoyed the first panel. It's such precise discussion of definitions and a deep knowledge of this topic. So I'm feeling a bit kind of different now because all the panel discussions that I usually get involved in are from the practitioner's world. So I'm not an expert in any of these, and I'm not an expert in migration of talents, etc. But I am happy to share with you some of my thoughts from my own personal experience. I hope that could be helpful. So I will share with you 3 observations, and all of which are in the area of integration. So we talk about the topic here, and I will focus on the area of integration. And I should clarify that, my primary context for what I'm about to say is from Asian immigrants, particularly from people from China. And these immigrants integrating in the society, our Canadian society, and more closer to home, Vancouver, because that's where my work is. So my first observation has to do with the circle of influence to immigrants. So when we talk about integration, the underlying assumption, I think largely, is about studying the immigrants on the one hand and integrating into a mainstream society on the other. But in my own experience, I think it is not that simple. I mean, I can quickly think of at least 5 different groups that would influence an immigrant and his or her integration into the larger society. One is new immigrant, right? They just came and this is all new. Another group is older immigrants, those who came 20, 30 years ago. And they have had their own experience in the society, and they have influence to the newcomers. That's the second group that I can see. The third group is, and this is not in any particular priority order at all, but the third group is this mainstream society, especially those who are more worldly, well-traveled, more open to new things, and feeling comfortable in dealing with people from a different cultural and ethnic background. And the fifth group sorry, that would be third, and the fourth group are those from the mainstream society who may not be so well-traveled or have a more global outlook in their dealings day to day. And lastly, we heard with our panelists talking about that already, is the network of immigrants still back home, with whom these immigrants keep very close contact with. So all these 5 groups influence, and I'm sure you can probably think more players in this equation that would influence the integration issue. So thinking about simply two-party interaction in this, we might be missing something. So think about all these groups. I think all these people who could influence and have impact on integration is important. And I hope that perhaps that's something from a research perspective that can help us fully understand the dynamics of integration. So that's my first observation. My second observation has to do with progression in a workplace. So Canada, like many other countries, we have employment equity laws. And as a result, we see many newcomers, immigrants getting hired into the workforce. So from a recruitment practice perspective of the HR, that seems to be working at least for the most part. But I think what has come short is what happens once these folks have gotten inside the organization. Those considerations that were given to the hiring process are not extended to subsequent experiences such as training, mentoring, how you evaluate somebody, and progression in their career. So that is something that I think has a lot of impact in the integration of immigrants in the workplace. Not only, in fact, for the individuals who are already in the workplace, but they could actually, the same very individuals, if they could progress in the organization, they could bring much more experience and as mentors for other newcomers. So as a result, I think we see in the workplace, even though many people from that community come into the workforce, but a very small proportion of them, in fact, progress into senior positions. So that could be something for a further study. And the third observation I would like to share is about the services provided to immigrant societies. So in the past, I think there's underlying assumption that these folks who came to a new world, they need help, they need settlement in terms of where to get schools and how to settle in and how to pay the bills and taxes, etc. These are very essential services. I think they are helpful. But what we have seen is the immigration and immigrants world the world has changed, at least from Asian and particularly the Chinese immigrants' perspective. These are the folks in recent years, 10, 20 years, they came with a wealth of experiences already, and their economic, financial resources, not only in terms of capital, but very close connection and networks back in the larger markets that are very important for the economic development at home. And sometimes we kind of wonder, because I came largely from a government background, even though I'm a practitioner now in this international trade area. But we kind of often wonder why the uptake of immigration services is so low, or immigrant services is so low. Actually, the ratio is very, very low, and I will leave that to perhaps Kenny, who has much more experience from a immigrant task force perspective. We wonder why that is low. So in my interactions with these folks, and what I'm hearing is that, Joan, we want to do something here. We have those basics covered. And in fact, they are more likely to go to their friends for these such basic help should they need. But what they're thinking more about is, what is the society is like here, and how the government works, what kind of regulations, how I can start a business, what kind of investments that are needed here that I could have some experience and means to help. So we see the sophistication, I think, is much higher now. And everybody in this society, it's not just limited to immigrants, but everybody in this society can use some help to advance, to really tap into their potentials here. But the help, the kind of services that are provided is something that we could think about, given that the world has changed. So those are the three short observations I will share with you, and I will stop right there. I see my time is up, but I look forward to more discussions. Thank you.
Very interesting, that similar point about kind of second stage or invisible obstacles that immigrants encounter, similar to, I think, in a way, what David was describing about second stage obstacles on the governmental level. Mike Hill, next, please. Mike is the Director for Integrated Talent Management at Applied Materials, which is located in
Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, California, and
Silicon Valley. So Mike's something of an immigrant here himself today, talking to us about HR from his perspective, which is not just an American perspective of Santa Clara. So welcome, Mike, and please come and join us.
Darcy, can you just pull up? So my grandfather was born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
All right.
David, on my way to the airport, my cab driver was from India. He started in the rock business. That didn't work. He went to metal recycling, and then he went to cab driving, and now he's interested in advertising on cabs. Go figure. Well, I live in Silicon Valley, and I've done work around the world with all kinds of people and businesses. And so before coming here, I interviewed about 12 of my peers in the industry. These are VPs of HR or business leaders, to get their perspective. And when I described the topic, they went all over the place in terms of issues. So some of it may be right on what you're thinking about here, some of it may be off to the side. So anyway, I'll try to represent what their top of the, what was in the top of their head. Okay, if this works right, I'll just go. I got 3 slides. So one of the biggest issues is finding and recruiting. It's not an issue of getting applicants. We got tons of resumes. The issue and I'm sorry, I'm representing high tech, so I'm not, that's my lens. It's just kind of a limited view. But the trouble here is we can't find the right people for the business. We need specific skill sets, and it's very hard to find them these days. And so we use all kinds of online resources and job boards, et cetera, to get this. Now, it's not a unique problem for our company. So, for example, right now, Samsung in Korea is trying to find people from outside of Korea to come to Korea. They're having a hell of a time recruiting. They can't get people to move there. It's not a unique kind of thing. It's happening all over the world for different reasons. So what's really happening, though, is I think this is a trend that people are becoming more selective about the work that they want to do. And I'll show you in a few minutes. Another related to this is I think mindsets are shifting. And I don't think we're really aware of these mindset shifts that are going on. Okay, I'm over in the wrong place here. So we can see that workers are having less affiliation with our organizations or less identity, and that's a problem, a particular problem. Where the leaders I'm talking to, they're thinking about the intellectual labor that's needed. They're not talking to me about the labor kind of folks, lesser skilled folks. They're really talking about the intellectual labor that people bring ideas and skills to the party. And they're thinking more in terms of, I need these people to do specific projects or tasks. So it's more of like a tool orientation versus an employee. So that could be a problem going forward as well. I'm just going to bring you challenges, sorry. I don't have any graphs and data and theories. Now, labor arbitrage, or the movement of people and work, is still going on, but we're seeing it's highly influenced by the cloud now. You know, if you have a computer with voice over IP, that's all you need to communicate anywhere, anytime. It's an enhancement if you have a phone, but you really don't need many tools anymore to do work. So we can do work 24/7. We can collaborate with people all over the world. And locations are shifting again. It used to be, let's go to China. Now we're going to Vietnam and India, and who knows where we're going to go next. So, but at the same time, some of these policies internal are shifting. So we know about Yahoo said, you know, the new CEO came in and found out everybody was working at home and said, no, you're going to work back at the workplace, because there's a couple of problems. One was affiliation. The other one was the reduced collaboration, face-to-face collaboration in teams and projects. So these are kind of issues, and they're all already relate to how we do work 24/7 anywhere in the world. So this whole idea of increased computer applications and computer capability is going to change a lot of things for us in the next 5 to 10 years. It's starting already to eliminate some of the lesser skilled jobs, which is maybe not so good for our conversation in here. So we have things like CEOs replacing their admins with a Siri interface, computer interface. We have a hotel somewhere in Tokyo that doesn't have a staff. You walk in and you just put all your information in. These applications will explode in the next 5 to 10 years. We have no idea what's going to happen. And one of the VPs of HR that I was interviewing said he's now able to reduce the staff on his HRIS system down to 2 people because it's Workday and it's all fully integrated. So he doesn't need 12 people now to run the back office of his HRIS system. So huge implications on staffing going forward. So let's see what else. Okay, this issue of cultural diversity is an important one for our business because it brings ideas. It really brings ideas and new ways to do work to our workplace, and it's not a new thing for us. In fact, when I was talking to this about other people, they were saying, well, there's kind of the remote worker who can live and work in anywhere, and then we have migrants who come in and work face-to-face with us. And so they were telling me that the remote worker who gets used to us on Skype or some kind of video link actually makes easier transitions to coming to a corporate office than a migrant does, who comes with such a different perspective on the world and culture and language. They have a much harder integrating quickly, although it's easier to build a relationship face-to-face than it is over the phone. So, you know, there's give and take, I guess, in that. So, am I doing okay on time here? Let's see. Okay, retention is really a big problem too. So, there's such a diversity of policy around the world in different countries that it's a full-time job just to create a strategy around retention. So, you know, for example, there's, let me look at my note here to make sure I get this right from that perspective. So, for example, there are countries that have no no laws regarding discrimination like we do here, maybe. Korea has this localization policy, which you probably know about, that forces us to put part of our business in Korea and hire Korean nationals. And then if you want to do business in another country, you have to invest somehow in that country. So economically, it's impacting the way we do business and having a significant impact on the people. So sometimes we have to find people in our business to go to Korea and run that office until that staff's up to speed. And sometimes that staff is never up to speed in terms of leadership, so they got to stay there for a very long time, which is a problem for them. So what we see is we see countries that are really lagging in policy. Some are just trying to keep up, and then there's some progressive stuff. So in the U.S., we're a little protectionist, maybe Canada is a little bit more progressive or selectively open, I don't know. Malaysia has this tax incentive policy to hire gray hairs. So there's different ways to look at these kinds of things, and this is a kind of a nightmare for the retention folks, trying to save your talent. But we also see, I call it a pendulum positive backlash. Because of the fact that we're hiring people to do tasks and treating them as tools, they don't stick around a long time. They're going to go on to the next big thing, right? So how do you create that affiliation now where people are starting to reverse the investment in development in other benefits to enable people to stay longer? So that's why you see some of these weird benefit packages and social things that are happening in the workplace that are trying to switch the affiliation back to more identity with the company. And then I think, okay, so the last thing is, I was thinking about, okay, what are some interesting research questions? They may or may not resonate for you, but I think there's this shifting mindset going on, and we're seeing some differences between the younger workers and the older workers, and particularly around in the younger worker space, it's sharing and ownership. So they share a lot, they don't own anything. That's not true for the older worker, so they're almost completely opposite. So what dynamic, and that's probably caused by social media and other things going on, but so what implication does that have in the workplace, even in sharing ideas between people? So that's one. And then the last one here, the concept of job and position is shifting. So we always thought of, the ideal thing was get a full-time job, you're good, at least for 3 years maybe in Silicon Valley. I think that's going to flip here soon. I don't know how soon, maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, but I'm part of a think tank organization in Redwood City who's looking at the nature of work and how it might change. And there's a whole group of people thinking about this, but one of the concepts they have is work is a service and it has a customer, which is different than work is a job and you have a boss. So it means that if you have a project or you have a little task to do, you always have a customer. Now the implications, if you play this out, is collaboration, innovation, and customer service or customer satisfaction. So these elements, and engagement also, if these are leveraged properly, they could have huge impacts on the nature of work and nature of business in the future. And the old idea of having a job, may eventually go away. I think that's down the road a bit, but that's some future thinking. Okay?
Okay. Kenny Zhang is Director of Business Development HQ Vancouver and can give us maybe some localized as well as some of his own personalized perspectives on these issues. Kenny, thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Vancouver. If you travel all the way from different continents or different countries to this beautiful city, and welcome to this beautiful place that I'm working with. And what I'm going to do is that I will share with you three areas of questions or challenges that based on my previous work and the current work. I previously was at the academic world, like many of you are. And also my area of research was on immigration issues, migration, multinational, multicultural, multinational identity, and so on and so forth. And then my particular focus was on the Canadians moving to other part of the world, which is the reverse of what I think. It's whether it's a north to north or north to south immigration, or is you see is an immigrant came to Canada and become Canadian and move back. So it's a circulation. There's different description on this kind of pattern. But anyway, that was my previous research interest. Now I recently joined a new organization, which is called HQ Vancouver. It is a PPP structure organization. It is supported by the federal government of Canada and also with the support from the provincial government of British Columbia. And also we work closely with the private sector, which is represented by BCBC, Business Council of British Columbia. So this, the work we are doing, the purpose or the mandate of this organization is basically to attract international investment to this beautiful province. We particularly attract international head office to this place. And so when we do our work, talking to the companies, try to promote Vancouver as a beautiful place. I don't have to mention too much about the beautiful weather scenario and a lot of things. And we focus on economic factors that try to help the company to understand the major drivers to decide making their head office in Vancouver. So we talk a lot of value proposition for companies to consider. One of the factors that actually has not been widely recognized or understood is a social security agreement. How many of you have heard about the Canada-China social security agreement? None. How many of you have heard about the Canada-Indian social security agreement? 1, 2. So this is an area that is not many people are actually aware of. So why social security agreement is important? Because bilateral social agreement provides a policy framework, allows the company in country A to send their workers to work in the country B, and then keep their social security continuity working in different countries. And also the company does not have to pay double pension or social security premium to the two-country system. So with this agreement, we'll save the company quite a bit by doing business in other countries. And taking Canada as the example, and Canada has signed 60 agreement with different countries. Most recently is with India, and early this year was agreement with China. So that will allow Indian company and the Chinese company send their executive to do business here without paying double social security. So this is really one of the factors that really increase Canadian economic competitiveness to attract. So this is one of the area that it's related to my work. The second issue that I want to share with you is Canada has a special rule to prohibit Canadians living overseas for over 5 years to vote in Canadian federal election. How many of you have heard about this? It's getting popular because recently it's a court issue now. It was originally at the Ontario Supreme Court last year. The judge made the decision that the 5-year forbidden of the overseas Canadian can vote is unconstitutional. So the judge ordered the Canadian government to change the law, but the government appealed to the Ontario Court of Appeal, and then last month the court made a decision that it was a split decision, 2-1, saying that this law is unconstitutional but is reasonable. So they turn over the the previous decision by the Supreme Court. Now the case is moving to the Supreme Court of Canada. We will watch to see what is the result. So my point is that because the theme or the conference here today is unleash the economic potential or unleash the potentials. So if we have this kind of law in place, actually we are discouraging our Canadians to go overseas, whether it's to study or to work, to do business. If you are leaving this country for whatever the business you are doing in the United States or in Asia, after 5 years, you will be punished by taking your voting rights away. So this is something that is I believe is unleash, is actually put the leash on our Canadians. So that's something I would invite our academics to do more research, to discuss this potential. The last point is, I will be very quick because I share very much with John's point that Canada is an immigrant country, and we pay a lot of attention to attract the best and brightest to this beautiful country. And also, we paid a lot of attention to provide a service, but largely on the labor market perspective. So we try to design program to help the migrants to find a job. Actually, recent change has been showing us that actually a lot of immigrants are not come here for a job. They are come here for creating job. They're actually looking for business opportunity. They're looking for investment opportunity. And that's something that we are not quite prepared to provide a service or to work with this kind of group with the entrepreneurship skill that can really help Canadian economy to move one step further to the global market. And then, so that's something that I will, again, to invite academics to do more research on this point and how to develop knowledge to help our policymakers and our public to understand this new phenomenon. Thank you very much.
Okay, so individuals blame organizations for not recognizing their potential. Organizations blame governments for not recognizing their potential. I don't know who governments blame. Is there anybody for the governments to blame? The final speaker today is the most courageous. Chloe Nichols is the Director of Immigration Policy in the British Columbia Ministry of Jobs, Tourism and Skills Training. Please bear in mind she hasn't had opportunity to hear all of these talks before daring to come up here and speak, but I think we all agree that it's essential to understand the perspective of government if we're going to have realistic expectations ourselves. So, Chloe, please.
I'm just going to try and put this one.
You're gearing up.
No.
I have to say, to be fair, that when we approached the ministries, many of them had a similar question, which was, what other ministries are going to be present? So I think in some ways it's good that we don't have too many here.
Yeah, so hi, my name's Chloe Nichols. I'm the director of the Immigration Policy Unit for the provincial government. So it's actually not being in the hot seat really, because due to jurisdictional, responsibilities, if I was a federal public servant, I'd be much more nervous on immigration issues than being a provincial public servant. And I will also say, who does government blame? I would argue in a democracy, we're all government. And so if you don't like what government's doing, you can blame yourself.
That's me dealt with.
I also wanted to just touch on a sort of one of the biggest things that I spend time talking about in my job is, why is there a provincial immigration unit given the jurisdictional responsibilities under the Constitution? And there's sort of two pieces that I wanted to capture that both David and Michael spoke on. One is David sort of articulated quite well, I thought, the federal shifts over the past few years and the impacts that those have. And the reality is that, the federal government selects immigrants to come to Canada, but they don't live in Canada. They live in BC and in Vancouver, and we are the ones that hear about the integration, labor market, education, family experiences that they have in our province. So a big piece of my job is sort of advocacy and policy advice, and I loved what Michael said about how work is a service and you have a customer. I try very hard to make our policy unit service-oriented, and our customers are our deputy minister and the minister. And a lot of what we do is give them advice on what we think they should perhaps do in certain situations. They don't always listen to that advice, but they take it very seriously. So I wanted to start with kind of a very macro discussion just on sort of what we mean in the BC context when we talk about newcomers and immigrants. So this is just a little slide that you can look at while I'm talking. So overall in BC, over the next, not quite 10 years now, but to 2022, our labor market forecasts indicate that we are expecting about 1 million job openings. 2/3 of those are from retirement, 1/3 from economic growth. And based on demographics, people coming from the K-12 system, even if we look at enhancing labor market participation of people who are not currently participating, we still estimate that about 1/3 of those job openings will need to be filled by migration. So either nationally or internationally, but given the rate of interprovincial migration to international migration, we get a lot more people from the world than we do from Alberta. We actually don't get anyone from Alberta. We mostly get people from Ontario and Atlantic Canada. That might be changing. This is true. And so in terms of who those folks are, I just pulled some historical immigration statistics in BC. So these are 5-year historical averages. We get about 36,000 permanent residents every year. The main countries of origin, China, India, the Philippines. About 65,000 temporary residents every year. These are mostly, and I think David talked a little bit about this, they're mostly through International Experience Canada, so they're students who come here and they get a work permit. That's about 60% of who is technically a temporary foreign worker in BC. And the main countries there are Philippines and actually the US and Europe because of the temporary nature, I think. And we get around 56,000 international students. So we are the 3rd biggest province in terms of immigration in Canada. The things that we're focused on provincially in terms of our objectives are increasing the quantity of immigrants. So I just talked about the demographic challenges and the gaps. So increasing the quantity, that involves a lot of discussion with the federal government because they set levels. Getting the right skills mix, so really about utilization of skills, both, we really take an economic growth perspective, but it's really about both economic benefit for the province, but also for the newcomer, so that they're also working at a sort of commensurate level and expectations around labor market attachment are being met. And the last one that we are focused on right now is something that we have been calling pathways to permanency or citizenship. So people who are here temporarily, who like being here, who have a job, who have settled, who have integrated, kind of goes to David's point about students and postgraduate folks. How can we create more pathways for them to stay here permanently? So in preparation for this, I got together with my team and we did a little bit of thinking about emergent themes in immigration policy. So these are some of the themes that we came up with, and I'm just going to speak actually to one of them. But we talked a lot about federal centralization. That's been a big pattern over the last few years. About 3 years ago, British Columbia, the federal government essentially repatriated the settlement services. They used to be delivered by the province with federal money. Now the federal government is delivering all of the settlement services nationally. Some aspects of centralization are good for efficiency, but obviously there's that ongoing tension between local needs and national boundaries and standards. Some of the other things, I talked a bit about settlement pathways, promoting mobility. One of the sort of questions that we came up with in preparation for this was, how can an immigration system that requires boundaries for all sorts of security and safety and other reasons support a boundaryless workforce? So when you talk to folks that are working at, in technology, in film and digital, in sectors where the creativity is instant, rapid pace, and then you're asking them to wait 6 months for someone to come into the country, or to use an archaic national occupation classification system code to describe a job that doesn't exist yet, that's the tension in immigration policy. The other ones are qualification and credential recognition, and that's again a federal-provincial tension because licensure is a provincial jurisdiction and the federal government selects immigrants. Public perception on immigration, I won't speak too much on this, but I actually think if I took my work hat off, that's my biggest concern, is that in a time when we need more and more migration in British Columbia and Canada, that the general Canadian public sentiment on immigration is changing in a way that's a little bit challenging. And the one I'm going to talk about a bit more is economic and non-economic dichotomy. I used dichotomy because I knew there would be a lot of academics. So this is something that we put together recently for our own purposes, and it's based on some CIC data, as well as there was a settlement outcome survey done in 2012 on outcomes of newcomers nationally, but there's also some really good BC data. So the concept is that the economic streams bring us economic workers, right? They have the skills we need, they make tons of money, they're all on the labor market, they're the engine. And that family class and refugees are sort of the price that you have to pay to get the economic immigrants. But it's not that simple. So what this is sort of getting at is that, well, it's a bit technical, so I'll try and walk you through it. So if we look at principal applicants, the lower number there is because that's adjusted for working age people. So when I talked about the average of 36,000, that's everybody. So some of those people are children and they're not working. Some of them are older and they're not working. So when you take out, usually it's about 80% labor force participation, you get more to the 25,000 number. And the boxes are just the different classes. So if you go with principal applicants and then who they bring with them and then you readjust for who works, you get to about 28,000. If you look at the workforce participation rate, the one that says PNP is our provincial nominee program. So without being too technical, we actually have the authority to select a certain number of economic immigrants. This year our cap is 5,500. And our program has always had a job offer requirement, and so the labor market outcome is very high, so 90%. The federal economic class is about 86%, but federal family, 72%, and humanitarian, which is primarily refugees, 78%. So one of the things that we're really interested in is how can you increase labor market participation across streams, regardless of what sort of bucket someone came in under. And perhaps there's tons of opportunities in the humanitarian, family, spousal classes to get to know those people. This is where the research comes in. Get to know who those people are, what their skills are, how they're contributing already, and how we can maximize that to have a bit more of a nuanced discussion. So I'll just end with, what do I think people can help us with? I just talked about the first one. So research on family class, refugees, spouses, like there's really, I think, there's probably not a lack because I do not know everything about immigration issues, but it's an area that we don't focus on as much. This is kind of a subversive one, but I found in my short time in my job, people almost always refer to principal applicants as male, but most of them are, not most, there's actually quite a few that are female. So sort of that gendered lens on principal applicants and how that changes the dynamic and the labor market participation. In qualifications recognition, there's actually been quite a bit of work on utilization of skills, but I think the trope is always very much, doctors driving taxi cabs. And where we need to delve into it is, if that person maybe owns that company and enjoys it and finds that that's a good balance for them and it's supporting their family, is that necessarily a bad thing? So getting more into, did the person want to be a doctor? Did they try to be? And it said there was systemic barriers, kind of delving a bit more into why credential recognition doesn't happen. And I think two other things. There's some interesting work to be done on the right mix of human capital and labor market attachment. So David talked a bit about this, but in a purely human capital model, you're focusing more on the capacity of someone to contribute. In a purely labor market demand model, you're essentially using a job offer as a proxy to ensure that that person will be, will contribute over the length of time. So there's probably some sweet spot in the middle of what are the success factors for people that sort of make it. I think probably bicultural competencies are one of them, and how can we kind of get into that space? And then the last one that I thought of when Joan was speaking is, the settlement services that are delivered are for the people who are chosen through the system. And as the system is changing, as David described, through the new express entry model and a different focus, how can settlement services shift to support the people who are being selected? And if you're moving more towards, high skill, high capacity, or you have people, as Kenny mentioned, who are more interested in entrepreneurship and investment than a job, what's the right bucket of settlement services to provide those people so that they can contribute? That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chloe. You've done my work for me there. I mean, I think you've picked up on all of the other panel members' points, or some of the points made by all the panel members, and you framed this problem framework very, very well. Thank you. And in doing so, obviously, you drew on your team. So thank you for putting the effort in with them and giving us the benefit of that. So it just seems to me on a very, very superficial level that the problems that face us are fundamentally problems of an academic nature. They're problems of depth. They're problems of short-term, long-term considerations. They're problems of understanding issues that didn't appear when you first initiated your research. The nature of human problems changes as people stay longer in the community, and the nature of their needs changes. We had that illustrated on several levels by people, also on the business level, by talking about the amount of effort we give to startup companies, but do we give the requisite amount of support to other companies, particularly medium-sized companies who are trying to grow into the kind of companies that Mike talked about? I'm sure our think tank leaders have picked up on issues from those 5 presentations that they will explore further this afternoon. But we've got some time now for questions to the panel. If you have a question, could you please try to address it to an individual member? I prefer to take them one by one. I don't really favor the group question kind of approach. So do we have any questions, first of all? Jesper, would you like to? Does anybody else want to go to numbers 2 in the queue? Carmen is number 2 in the queue. And sorry, I don't know your name? Lucia, number 3. Thank you. Okay, Jesper, please.
Thank you. My name is Jesper Edman. I'm Swedish, but I work in Japan, so these immigration issues are very interesting. I guess this question goes to the last speaker, to Chloe, although it touches on a lot of the other ones. In the first session this morning, we heard Paul Wahler talk about the Somali taxi drivers and the creativity that comes from that. And what I've heard here is that Canada seems to have a very specific selection process. And in your last slide there, the refugee or the bottom was very small. And I'm wondering, how many Somali taxi drivers do you take in? And is there a concern that that type of creativity that he was talking about, that doesn't seem to come from the 4-year kind of standardized future employee, that Canada is missing out on that? Or is that something that you think about? Because those seem to be 2 very different types of immigrants and 2 different types of effects.
Is this going to come on, or do I have to go up there?
It's on.
They're all on.
It's on? Oh. That's a good question. Thank you. I guess I'll start by saying that, without dodging the question, the selection of immigrants overall is done by the federal government. So in terms of their focus on refugees or other types of classes, that would sort of be more a policy question for them. I will say BC we actually have quite a low rate of refugees compared to the rest of the provinces, and that's something that we're doing a little bit of thinking about. I think, though, you raise a really good question. One of my colleagues in the federal government who works on credential recognition always says that Canada is a country of alternate careers, and that many Canadians don't actually work in the jobs for which they were trained. But we don't see that necessarily as a loss, but somehow from an immigration perspective, it sort of comes up as a real loss. And I think it's interesting, the sort of what I was trying to get at, where, if it's more about what's the potential of creativity and innovation in that person, and are they contributing in a way that they feel is meaningful, and if that's true, then perhaps it hasn't been, perhaps it's not the worst thing in the world, they haven't pursued that. However, if they tried to pursue it and there were systemic barriers and there were, issues that stood in their way that government could intervene in, then that's a problem. I used to run our foreign credential recognition program here in BC, and we did 2 reviews on credential recognition in BC directly with regulatory bodies, and we've invested quite a bit of money in ensuring that international licensing times are on par with domestic licensing times to try and get at that. But I do think it's a really interesting question about is it a failure if someone's not working exactly in what they want, and how can we have maybe a broader definition of what that success looks like? I don't know if that answers your question. It doesn't, because you're coming back.
I guess what I was just driving at is, well, you're a public servant, so you answered very well. I guess what I'm driving it at is that unselected portion of potential immigrants that can become entrepreneurs, that don't usually fall into the ones that you would like to select, and that's usually the refugee status. That's usually the ones that start in rock breaking and then metal and then come to build something, and that seemed to be missing in the Canadian strategy. So that's all that I was asking about.
Maybe I'll add 2 other really quick things. One interesting thing the federal government's been doing since the changes to the temporary foreign worker program is trying to work with employers to see refugees as a potential source of labor for lower wage entry jobs, not in a way to stigmatize or put those people in a box, but rather to say, if you're just looking for someone in an entry-level position that has some capacity and can grow, why would you not consider someone who's here already? So I know they're doing some interesting work, and we're also working on a pilot with the federal government that's looking at labor market attachment across all streams. So we'll have a refugee component as well, likely, to look at where are the best places for those folks to fit into the labor market across, because the labor market needs everyone, right? Like, we all go to, this is my thing, we all go to Starbucks, or maybe we don't all, but lots of people go to Starbucks, but somehow we stigmatize working at Starbucks. You would think, given how special Starbucks is, that it would be the greatest place in the world. People would want their kids to work there, but they don't. So the labor market needs everybody in different spots, and I think that we can probably do a better job, and that's one of the things we're trying to do in the pilot that we're working on.
There is a breakout group on culling that Ilango is leading, which really speaks to the issue there. And it just occurred to me too, hearing the entire panel, and Chloe coming last, you did a great job of referring back to the people that came before you. But you can, from an academic perspective and methodological perspective, you can see really the need for more and more qualitative research in this regard, because we don't know that. There's an assumption, like you said, David, that these people are not liking their job, but we don't know that, and so we need to find that out.
Okay, thank you. Carmen, would you like to come out in our queue of 2? Principal Oliver, you're now number 2.
Hi, I'm Carmen from the University of Victoria Business School. Thank you very much for the panel. Underlying the tensions, the challenges, and probably the opportunities for immigrants in the receiving country. I was wondering whether we have thought about what impact our immigration policies and welcoming all of these immigrants to the sending country. Or should it be a question that we should pay attention to at the same time?
Is there somebody
I have-
particular?
Sorry, Terry, I'm not addressing any particular person, but I would certainly appreciate hearing from both the government and the industry about this issue.
Mike, this is one of the kickstarts for this session was the idea that big companies from developed countries learn a lot by operating overseas, and they bring quite a lot of that back to their own operations in their domestic headquarters. But are we really kind of turning that knowledge to the advantage of the community around that large multinational company? I mean, and this touches on issues of corporate social responsibility overseas as well. I mean, what is the sense in industries like the one that you specialize in about this notion of commitment to sources of labor and commodities? Is there a perspective that you have on that?
In the country that you're working in?
In the country that you're working in, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I think we do learn a lot. Oh, we do learn a lot from working in other countries, yeah. And we have, in each country, we have a relationship with the community. In our businesses, we always have very close connections. I don't know if it's explicit, though, that there's any transfer occurring there. So it would be very informal if I'm not aware of any specific things that occur there.
Does anybody in the room have anybody in the room like could respond to, or anybody on the panel, any responses to Carmen's question?
If I may,
Kenny.
If I may add just one quick response to the point is that the growing evidence has shown to us is that actually the direction of migration is being changed, and it's no longer A to B or B to A. Is circulating, and so it's very difficult. And also, it's a very challenge for the research and the policy community to define whether the sending country or the receiving country. But if the sending country and the receiving country can work together to share the benefits of the movement, that's the best scenario.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
I'm going to lower this just like that. So my name is Luciana Hakak. I'm assistant professor at the University of the Fraser Valley, just an hour away from here. I'm very much multicultural. I have 3 citizenships, and I do research on immigrant integration to the labor market, underemployment, and specifically my most recent research was doctors driving taxi cabs. So there's that. It's true. So David was describing a little bit about the immigration context in Canada, especially the most recent changes, and there's a couple of things that come together with that were mentioned, and that I think interfere with the idea of immigration as community building and as building into our labor market and helping Canada to grow economically. So one of those programs that he didn't mention was the temporary worker program increasing in the same rate that the economic or skilled workers quotas had been decreasing. The other was difficulties put in place for the family reunification program. Family reunification was when immigrants could bring parents over, parents that often had an important role in caregiving and in helping the family to stay in Canada and to become productive, both the man and the woman, and the woman, by the way, to stay active in the labor force. Citizenship difficulties. Now the time for citizenship has increased. So all of this you can't be seen as a vacuum, right? All of these policies come together, and of course what you mentioned, which was the student graduates and then it has to have all that justification for them to be able to remain employed. So all of this comes together, and it seems to be that immigrants in Canada have become more temporary than stable, and that the policies in place have encouraged this. And that brings me back to when Mike was saying that, in companies now, employees in companies, they feel less committed. We treat them as tools, and so they're less inclined to stay. And I'm wondering about the policy implication of all of these different programs that seem very separate, but that all sort of don't contribute to the building of community. And so my question, is that, I don't know if this is to Chloe or to David, but do we think that all of these recent programs that came from the current government of Canada, and not previous governments, but the current government of Canada, do we think that all of these programs are going to help or hinder labor market integration specifically?
David, please.
Excellent question. And you will notice that when I made my presentation, I was very careful in not to overstep the bounds or make any judgment call on the type of policies that were in place. I did that very specifically because I don't know whose political philosophy rules. But certainly from a practitioner's point of view, the policies we had before the Conservatives came in were very liberal, both in the capital L and small l sense. The policies we have now with the present government, as I indicated with that mantra of economics, efficiency, and enforcement, they are very, very tight. They are very mechanistic in carrying through with the regulations. You mentioned excellent points on, before we used to have open-ended immigration for grandparents and parents. Now that has been limited to 5,000 parents or individuals per year. Every January they open it up, and within a matter of days that quota gets filled. And the government has a way of dealing with immigration administratively, which means, for example, even if you're successful in having your parent or grandparent accepted, or you're part of the application that was accepted, it will take anywhere from 7 to 10 years to bring that parent over. This is how they deal with matters. They adjust it by making it administratively difficult. They have reduced the age of dependency from 22 to 19. Now, if entrepreneurs, and I only mentioned skilled workers in my presentation, and they've gutted the business class totally on a federal basis so that we now rely on what the provincial nominee program will allow. But imagine if you're coming from a culture where you've got children who are with you, they're 20, 21, well, you can't have them on the application because they're no longer dependents. And once again, it is eliminating and it is affecting the decisions that potential immigrants may want to come. If you're a skilled worker, you eventually want to bring your mother or father, will you really consider Canada? If you can't bring your child who is 20 or 21, will you really consider Canada? It is restricting, restricting, restricting. And it is very insistent on everybody complying with a certain standard. And that standard has been set very high right now. And part of the reason is that Canada is an attractive country. You are still going to get your 250,000 immigrants per year, and we, the government, has the luxury of selecting the very best candidates, and in this case, fitting in with the cultural philosophy, the political philosophy of this government. So immigration is becoming very, very restrictive here for Canada. That is as a general, and I appreciate what you're saying. You're right. Your impression is right.
Can I just add maybe
please,
a couple
Chloe,
things
yes,
on that?
yeah.
David handled that first part of the question. I just wanted to provide a bit of context in BC. So, and this, this data is not from 2015, but historically, temporary foreign workers, or people that would fall under the temporary foreign worker program in BC, like I said, have been primarily under International Experience Canada or under what's now called the International Mobility Program. So that's about 65%. And then about 35% are now what would fall under the temporary foreign worker program. And of those, it's primarily caregivers. We have a fairly high number of caregivers and seasonal agricultural workers. And then the fraction of people who are either high or low skilled temporary foreign workers is smaller than that. Overall, it's less than 1% of BC's workforce of 2.4 million people. So just that sort of context, not to say that it's not important, but I think that every province has had different impacts from the changes to the TFW program, and BC's have been different than, say, Alberta's or Ontario's. The other piece is that when I talked about one of our focuses being pathways, I think that more speaks to a bit of your question of making sure that so one thing that we're working on, for example, is that under the new federal express entry model, it's only NOC O, A, and B. But there are some jobs in BC that are very highly in demand, where people have brought in folks temporarily. They want to support them, they want to keep them, they're working, and there's no federal permanent pathway for that person who's potentially been here working for 3 years. So that's something that our minister and others have been advocating on, and I think we would, say that there needs to be a lot of times we talk about permanent people for permanent jobs and temporary people for temporary jobs, and so creating the right permanent pathways for people who are here and who want to stay, while also recognizing that the labor market sometimes needs cyclical temporary people for certain reasons, and ensuring that there isn't an impediment to a business cycle because it takes like 10 months to get a temporary worker. Well, that's not really very temporary, right? So that's sort of where we're going on that, but really focusing on pathways and opportunities for permanency where possible.
Thank you, Chloe. Can we move to one final question, please, before lunch? Oliver?
Thanks very much. When we look at unleashing the potential of migrants, what we often do is to try to find the perfect fit between what migrants bring and the labor market, right? And so migration policy is often directed very much by this. And what we've seen lately is to shift more and more capacity to employers themselves. They are more involved in the provincial nominee program. We demand immigrants to have pre-arranged jobs. If this is the case, I'm just wondering whether there are policies directed at employers to allude them to the potential that immigrants have, because in a way the burden is more on immigrants. They have to fit the bill that employers have, but you wonder if it's too narrow a perspective when we try to really bring into to full view the potential that immigrants have, to also include programs to allude employers to the potential benefits of different kinds of immigrants, right? So it would be also a matter of not educating, but at providing information pathways to employers to see a different type of potential in immigrants. I'm just wondering whether this is at all on the policy, in the perspective of policymakers these days. That's probably for Chloe.
I can speak to the provincial perspective on that. We've done quite a bit of work. We've done some work with the Immigrant Employment Council of BC and with some other organizations, specifically around the topic of sort of increasing employer awareness. We're particularly interested in small and medium enterprises, given that that's the bulk of BC businesses. Often I find when we talk to the big players, they have diversity teams, they have HR strategies, but it's really the folks that are maybe hiring 5 or 10 people that haven't necessarily considered hiring either a newcomer who's already here or interfacing with a federal or provincial economic immigration program. So we've definitely done quite a bit of work in that regard over the last few years and ongoing as well. And I know the federal government is doing some work linked to Express Entry, where they'll have an employer liaison network, and there'll be people who are specifically available to sort of educate, inform, promote the Express Entry model to employers. I think we could definitely do more, particularly with small and medium businesses, where people just think, oh, I would never do that, it's too much of a hassle. And I think it's actually probably not as hard as they think. And so that's something that I think we need to focus more on.
If I can just have a follow-up to Oliver's question, just a brief comment. It's a paradox that exists with how policy is implemented. You can certainly tell governments that, yes, you can have in place information for the employers and actively tell employers what to do, but when administratively you've instructed your branch, such as Employment and Social Development in Canada, to be very hard on the applications, it's counterproductive. We are finding we're having more and more difficulty having approvals come through for these labor market impact assessments from ESDC, because there's been some sort of directive from higher up. Let's be very hard on all of these employers who are now trying to seek approval for their foreign workers. So yes, you can get out, and the government can on one hand tell employers, this is what you should do, this is how you should follow the programs, this is what is required, but on the other hand, makes it very difficult. That's the dilemma. That's the problem.
Yeah, we feel this at universities as well, right? It gets more harder and harder to get people from outside the country, different types of.
Joan, did you want to?
Sure. Certainly, when we have a much more stringent selection criteria to say, this is the kind of people we want, and then these are the kind of jobs that perhaps they could fill, do, I think, in practical sense, limit the potential of what we could get out of these people. And myself, I was trained as an engineer, so I have an engineering background, and now all my 19 years within the provincial government, most of those years I was not working as an engineer. Now I'm in the economic development area, and I'm not working as an engineer. The people whom I work with, especially potential investors, these are the folks who have put money in whatever the projects that for which they got their immigration, but later on they are in a different area to contribute economically. And it's not that they are going to look for a job in organization, but many of these folks actually do get involved in much larger investment projects. So when I interact with these folks, it's actually very interesting because it's quite typical that we say, I will ask them what they'd like to do. And some may say, well, I'd like to do this, but many would say, I really don't know what I could do, but I'm listening, right? So we ended up having a strategizing session. We're really just by me telling them what this place is about and what kind of things are potentially are the potential areas that they may be thinking about, and also discover what their experiences and resources are, and find things that even themselves may not be thinking that they could use. So it's very much of a creation of idea, and then they get into some business that is very, very productive for this society. So I do think that we may want to think much broader. And many of us even take away this immigration label and issue in our lives. We may actually get into different things that were not our original education. So very much share the thought.
Thank you.
I want to thank our panel once again for spending their Saturday with us. And now we have lunch. Lunch is set up in a mirror setup, like as the coffee was, with sandwiches and salads on either side of this fourth floor. We're going to meet again here at 1 o'clock, assemble in this room, and have another keynote by Dr. John Barry to get us going for the afternoon. Before you leave, I wanted to, first of all, the think tank facilitators, during lunch, perhaps, I know that when I was listening to the panel and the two keynotes, a lot of aha moments occurred to me in terms of, wow, okay, well this would be something to look at further in Ilango's think tank, or this would be something that's ripe for Tom Rail's think tank. But as a think tank facilitators yourselves, maybe think about some integrative aha moments that you've had, and we will start after Dr. Barry's talk. I think it might be a good idea to have each of you facilitators just say a word. I know you've sent in a paragraph, and it's in our program what their think tank is about, but maybe something that you took away from the morning that can entice people to come to talk to you about. We have 8. Yeah, we have 8 breakout rooms, I believe. Is that right? And we've put out signs on the breakout rooms. Most of them are on this 4th floor, and we have another 4 breakout rooms on the 3rd floor, which is obviously 1 floor below here. And we've put out the titles of the think tanks on each of them. And in some cases, we've grouped 3 think tanks per room, because we felt that they would be fun think tanks to have in the same room together, and you'll see why on that. We've reserved 2 special rooms that accommodate 6 people if there are other ideas that people have and they just want to have a little huddle. So we have additional rooms available for something like that. So please enjoy lunch. And if you could come back at 1 o'clock to keep on going for the afternoon with some fuel in you, that would be great.
For those of you who like to move your hands while you're eating, it is permitted to use one of the breakout rooms to sit down and enjoy your lunch.
Food, 2 rooms. Yeah. Yeah.